This hour of broadcasting brought to you by 𝗃𝗴Radiocenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. Brought to you by Vigilant Impact. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping the vigilant, those men and women who stand watch, keeping our houses of worship and places of faith safe. We believe church safety and security must be a ministry first and have engaged, servant leaders who continually strive for excellence and teams of motivated volunteers that are always training. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗂𝗿𝗵𝗂 and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, churchsafetyguys.com, and on the original Church Security app. Download it today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your ministry.
Well, hello and welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and once again joined by my co-host, Mike.
Hey, James. How are you, sir?
I am good. How are you doing?
Hey, the first Sunday in 3 weeks that I haven't been sick, so I'm glad. I'm in good shape.
That's a good thing.
Yep, exactly.
That is a good thing. Yeah, it's kind of nice. The question is, how is the rest of your family? Because I know all of you guys were sick.
Yeah, it wiped us out. I mean, it took out the whole family, and multiple times over the course of about 13 days. So it all five of us had in one shape or form throughout that. So it's good to be on the other side and feeling like, hey, we can actually go into the week and have some energy this time.
For sure. The only one not sick was the dog.
Yeah.
Which you haven't had him too long, but I'm sure he was a comfort for the,
well, at least for the kids anyway.
Baby. Yeah.
For us, it was just more work.
There you go. So fun things for sure. I actually had the opportunity. So far I think we've been pretty healthy. We haven't had any major issues lately as of late. But yeah, I have the opportunity, very busy for sure. I mean, we've been really going crazy with trying to work on some projects for our ministry, and certainly trying to update the website, trying to do assessments. We're running around. So we're staying pretty busy, but I had the opportunity, which doesn't happen too often, to actually hang out with Glenn Evans. Glenn is actually helping us out with training and doing some training with us now. And so he was actually, I believe, in Central Ohio, out towards Dayton somewhere. He was doing some training with a church and doing active shooter training. And so he invited me to come out Saturday. So I spent about half the day with him on Saturday, him and his son. And it was a great opportunity, great time for us to chat a little bit and spend some time together. So it was a lot of fun, and we're in the middle right now of trying to put together a list of training classes that he can offer with us and go through that. So if you are interested in doing active shooter training specifically, you're welcome to reach out to us through our website, which is churchsafetyguys.com. That's still up, even though we're going to be doing some work on it here. and just contact us. You can go to the Contact Us page and send that request in, and then I can usually I see those, and then that can go to get forwarded to Glenn, and he can reach out and connect with you about the details of training and what he offers and what your church needs. Because a lot of times what Glenn and I were talking about this Saturday, a lot of times people think, oh, I need this kind of training. And then when we sit down and talk to them, or even a trainer, it's kind of like you realize that you really needed a different style, different format of training for your team than what you thought. So we're happy to help you kind of navigate that. And as always, as far as resources, I'd like to shout out for the Church Security app. You can download that on iOS and Android stores now. Android has been having some issues lately, and so some of the new Mike and I noticed this at the conference, actually. Some of the newer Android phones, Samsung, LG, you have to actually download a patch to get the app to work. And if you Google that, I'll try and research that this week, because I can't remember what patch it is. But there's something that Samsung actually has on the Android site where you can download that and then download our app, and it connects to the older apps. But again, that is something that we're working on next with the website to update as well. So there's definitely a lot going on, so hang in there. But as always, the app is free. It's free to download, free to register, thanks to our sponsors. And there's a lot of great information. If you can download it, there's a lot of great information on there. But if for some reason you're having issues with it, feel free to reach out to us through the regular website, and we'll do whatever we can to get information to you accordingly. So on this broadcast for this Sunday evening is when it's being recorded live. I reached out, actually, I think it was a few months ago, I reached out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they were gracious enough to send an individual our way to chat with us. And we really wanted to talk. They've got some phenomenal resources, and we're going to talk a little bit about that on this broadcast for churches with their website, which is missingkids.org. But I want to bring in, I will bring in Susan Kennedy is our guest on this broadcast from the National Center. So thank you again, Susan, for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So we'll jump into it. And we were kind of joking around earlier, because there's so many resources on the website. Sometimes it's crazy how many different avenues of information and whatnot. So we were going to try and go through just a few of the things today, but tell us your story. How did you get involved with them? And what for maybe the individual listening that doesn't know what the National Center does, what does your organization do?
Sure. So I have been working in child protection for about 15 years. Largely, I've been working really connected to investigations of child sexual abuse. So I did that at the local level. I'm from Virginia, that's where I live. And about 5 years ago, there's an opportunity for me to join the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and really focus on prevention, which is what I really wanted to do. So most of my time here at the National Center has been really focused on prevention. And we'll talk about the range of issues that the National Center deals with, but we're talking about kids who have gone missing, many of whom have run away from home. And then on the exploited side, we're talking about kids who've been sexually abused, and there's been some kind of technology involved in that. And we can dive into that. Just a range of issues. So thinking through how We can provide prevention resources directly to kids, to professionals, from teachers to after school to places of worship, and what those materials should look like so that they'll be easy to understand, and also so that they will relate to really what the National Center is seeing on a daily basis as an organization that responds to missing exploited children. So the National Center is a nonprofit. We're based in Virginia, where I live, outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And we have three parts of our mission. One is to find missing children. The second is to reduce child sexual exploitation. And the third is to prevent victimization. So as I talked about, that's really core to the mission of the center, is that as we provide various services that help law enforcement and others respond to cases, we're also taking what we're learning and infusing that into easy to use, even if they can be hard to find on their website, but easy to use resources really around prevention. So we really see ourselves as a resource center for families, for tech companies we work very closely with, for law enforcement, and just members of the public and anyone who's working with kids. We really see ourselves as a clearinghouse and a resource center.
Awesome. So one of the things that I mentioned actually before we jumped into the broadcast and went live, a few years ago, I was kind of looking for resources from a standpoint of trying to help my church and trying to just set things up so we had a process to check kids in and check kids out, and how to handle it if maybe a child came up missing, or that sort of thing. And one of the things that I did was I went on a scavenger hunt to try and find information, and actually stumbled across your website, which was great. Being my background was in retail and logistics, it caught my attention really quick that you guys are the overseers of the 𝗂𝗵𝗂𝗋 policy and procedure. And so my church right away adapted that and said, okay, let's make this easy. If people are that familiar with it from a retail standpoint, then bringing it into the church is easier to train people on what to look for and how to respond and that sort of thing. But that is something that you guys still take care of and encourage, correct?
Yes, yeah, and I can talk for just a minute in case people aren't familiar. 𝗂𝗵𝗂𝗋 is actually named for Adam Walsh, who was unfortunately abducted and murdered when he was 6 years old. And his parents, John and Rebay Walsh, were the founders of the National Center. So it is a program that we continue in his name.
Sure.
And as you said, it started in retail because Adam was abducted from a shopping mall. He was out with his family. So really around helping retail employees and management be ready if they have an emergency situation like that. What's the first thing you do, the second thing you do, how to respond, so that and I'm sure you talk about this all the time, is being prepared for the unexpected is the best preparation is when something happens. You want to kind of not be scrambling for what to do, but you want to have that ready to go. And so we do provide those kits for free. There's training videos, there is literature, and you can always, call and talk to someone on the outreach team. For example, if you can't find that right resource, or if you have questions about what was in the kit, or you need additional resources, we are happy to help anyone who calls with that kind of thing as well. But yes, 𝗂𝗵𝗂𝗋 is still, you just go right on our website and there's boxes to put in your information, and we'll mail you out everything you need to implement that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. One of my hobbies, I guess, is and Mike, I'm sure, will probably laugh at me for saying this or admitting to this, but one of my hobbies is actually reading about true crime stories and researching true crime and that sort of thing. And so I was really kind of shocked to find out that years and years and years ago, my family actually lived in New Jersey. And at one point in time, they decided to move to New England because my parents just didn't really like the atmosphere. Like, they felt like it was getting too big city, and they wanted to move and move to more rural, safer environment, neighborhood, that sort of thing. And so I don't remember too much of that other than moving, because I was really little. But going backwards and researching, a lot of my time, and a lot of my family's time when I was really little, I was probably, I think 2 or 3 at the time, was spent at the same mall that Adam, that his son was abducted from. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, you know, that just kind of hit home for me that, you know, this is really, really serious, and this is important, and it can happen anywhere. And certainly, you know, my parents were part of that, being, you know, local to that community, that kind of drove them to say, you know, this is something to be concerned about and more aware of. So, but anyhow, so let's look at, what are some of the key areas that you guys see, that might apply to churches and places of worship directly. You mentioned some online type situations. That would probably be for more, well, at one point I would say that would probably be for more older kids, but now, considering that, you know, my 12-year-old is like beating me up for my iPad continuously.
Yeah.
But what are some things that you guys are seeing with that at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point about the internet safety. I think we do often think of that as being something you start to worry about maybe as your kids are teenagers. But, you know, as you said, young kids younger and younger getting devices and have access to that tablet. But also, I think a lot of parents don't think about gaming apps as being an online platform, and many of them are now. So many of them allow that connectivity for people to talk to one another. You know, common examples like Roblox and Minecraft, and there are others that even young kids use. So if parents aren't aware of which games allow chatting, or just interactions with people in general. So all, you know, kids younger than you think are online. And even, you know, young kids, you know, a lot of kids have email addresses now, you know, even schools that maybe wouldn't introduce that until older, many of them have them now because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and you needed a way for teachers to correspond. So, you know, young elementary school students often have email that they're checking now at school. And so there's that possibility. I think for churches, I mean, you know, first of all, to be concerned, you know, if you've got kids who are using devices maybe in free time while they're, you know, waiting for one activity to start or something like that, you certainly could have communication between you know, an adult and a child. And we have to remember, two juveniles could even communicate with one another in a way that is harassing or exploitative. So that's something to think about. But also, obviously, we want people to connect with one another. That's one reason we build community at church, right? So making sure you're thoughtful about, you know, does your church have policies about how adults communicate with kids online? You know, if they send emails or text messages to say this activity is rained out, or we're going to meet here instead of, you know, this part of the church or whatever, do you have policies? Are you being thoughtful about requiring maybe adults to have, you know, the parent of the child on that message too, so that you're not establishing the possibility for an adult to communicate privately with the child online? I think the biggest thing, you know, I think the most important way to think about technology is that the reason it allows for kids to be exploited is it allows direct access. So before the internet, if you wanted to build a private, unhealthy relationship with a child, you have to physically find privacy to do that, which is easy to supervise in the physical space. I mean, it's not. It can be easier to supervise than, you know, not knowing who they're talking to on the phone. So I think that's having those policies and thinking through that online communication is really important.
I think I'll go back to something that you said, and then I'll throw it over to Mike. But you mentioned the accountability aspect of like a church leader texting someone and having another adult on that text to kind of see the dialogue. And honestly, that's something that I've never even thought of, but that's an amazing idea. And the reason I would say that is just because I've seen situations where it gets crazy, not even intentional, but it's, you know, dialogue, discussion, stuff is misunderstood via text. And that's very easy because you can't see the person, you can't hear the tone. So having that, and one of the things that actually that my church does is they'll send out a mass message to communicate via we use Planning Center software, but basically that records it and records the message that's going out, you know, as a bulk text. but it also goes out to several key people within the church so they can see and monitor, the response and that communication as well. But that's a fantastic idea. And oftentimes, unfortunately, we have seen an increase from places of worship. We have seen an increase of kids being exploited via leaders and workers, whether they've been background checked or not. So certainly you want to have the background check process there for liability's sake. But Mike, did you have anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I pick up on the part with the we all have heard the horror stories with the internet and the connectivity, and the games is certainly the scary thing happening now. I mean, my oldest is 9, my youngest is only 2, but at the same point, I sit there and say, just their access to YouTube, it's not necessarily just what's on YouTube, it's what's in the ads between the YouTube videos. And sometimes
for sure
they end up down a rabbit hole, and you're like, okay, well, I thought I put them on this video and they were going to be fine right there. No, before you know it, they're 6 degrees from Sunday in a different spot. But what I would add is sometime that is not always talked about would be understanding what devices are accessible in your church. So there's a lot of classrooms or different areas that may rely on playing a YouTube video or playing worship because they don't necessarily have a live worship artist coming into that space. Well, they may be piping that in some way. So those devices are online. So what are the policies? What are the procedures around making sure that those devices remain in control so that you're not either having a student that gains access to it, or worse, you have somebody who's in a position of authority misusing that internet connection on a device that's buried in a classroom with a child. And so there's a need to look at that. And I think as a safety and security, we don't always think about our job being looking at the devices. A lot of times that's a facility or an IT related focus, but it really should be a focus of the safety and security space as well.
For sure. What, Susan, what do you think some of the things, let's talk about like leaders and screening and that sort of thing for just a minute. What are some of the things that that you guys have seen, or maybe your recommendations on maybe screening, or just being things to be aware of if maybe you've picked a leader, you've gone through that process, you have a leader, and you start seeing something that you get a red flag, you don't, this doesn't look right, but you don't really know like why it doesn't look right. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would say is, screening, like you guys have already alluded to, screening is a must do, but it is not by any means the end all be all. And what we know from the data in the field is that unfortunately, a lot of offenders who harm children either have not harmed them before to be showing up on a background check, or they weren't caught, or they weren't adjudicated. So I worked for about 10 years in child sexual abuse investigations. Very few of those cases are able to be prosecuted. So it is really important to screen out people who are on the sex offender registry, or obviously who have a criminal history of offending against children. But we should never believe that because we do that, everyone who works for us will never offend against a child. That's just not the way it works. And so what you have to do is have layers of protection.
Sure.
With the screening process, I think background checks are important. Reference checks, reference interviews are really important. Asking candidates, having behavioral interviews where you're asking people about, why they want to volunteer, critical thinking skills, and just having, lengthy interviews, not just knowing someone through, drops off an application form, run a background check, and they're fine. You really need to meet them. You need to talk to the references, stuff, and things like that. And then training is so important for everyone who works with kids, and it needs to happen often. And just what you said, James, I think that having people prepared for, okay, if our policy is, you have a rule of 3, there's always going to be 3 people in the room, or you have 2 adult leaders, or whatever your child protection policy is, and you should have a policy that's shared with everyone who volunteers, everyone on staff, all of the congregation, really. And let's say you see someone repeatedly breaking that rule, like one child, one adult, and they're shutting the door and it makes you uncomfortable. And you've opened the door and reminded them and they're still doing it. What do you do? Everyone who works at your church should know the answer to that question. Everyone who works there should know, this is what I expect. If James sees me, taking a kid for, who's having a hard time to a quiet place in the church where no one can see, I'm going to expect that someone's going to come and interrupt that and remind me that no one else can see that interaction. And you're also going to expect me to intervene if I see something that you're doing. And it's hard. It's really hard. So ongoing training is important, but there are organizations, first of all, insurance boards, insurance companies often offer training, not just on child sexual abuse prevention, but those boundary violations that you're talking about. And there's some national organizations as well that we work about that had in-depth training. It's a really hard thing to do. And it's how kids are vulnerable in organizations, because offenders are counting on the fact that people are going to be too uncomfortable to say anything. And so that's really the job of, these safety committees to really institute training, make sure everyone's going through it. And I think too, that's a key part of prevention, because if someone is coming to your church and they're thinking, I'm going to volunteer here, and this will be an easy way for me to groom a child and commit offense, and then they see the training they're going through, and they see how people are responding, that they seem to know this stuff, and they notice maybe they do a little testing, someone calls it out, they're going to go to a different organization. They're not going to stick around because now it's too difficult in your church to do what they're aiming to do. So they'll leave. And so that's where that really gets preventative as well.
Yeah, it's very challenging because and for those of you that are listening or maybe here at a later time, from a safety and security aspect, that's just as important. So in having people respond to situations with children, one of the things that we always instituted was, regardless if you're responding to an incident where a child's hurt or something's happened, you need to have at least 2 people from the safety team respond so that you have that accountability, but also an extra set of eyes, a witness to what happened and that sort of thing. And so if you're thinking maybe there should be, if you're listening and you think maybe it should be different because you're a children's worker versus safety ministry, that's just not the case. Anytime you respond to a situation, you should have an extra person there, or if you're working with kids, you should have an extra person there. It's just a good habit to get into. But ultimately, having the accountability, and we've actually, to your point, Susan, we've actually seen that happen where we had an individual that came to our church, started, trying to volunteer, and we were like, wait a second, we need to do a background check. We need to sit down. We need to chat with you. We interview our folks, like you mentioned. And so, some things came back that weren't great. With all of that. And we basically, we put it together and we said, you know what, this ministry in the church probably isn't the best thing for you to be working in. So, it didn't necessarily mean, with their situation, it didn't necessarily mean that, we asked them to leave the church. We didn't. We just said, moving forward, here's another area that we could use some help. Maybe you'd like to serve in that area, but right now we would just be more comfortable, with you not serving with the kids. So different things like that are certainly helpful.
Yeah, it's something I see a lot too. My son is in Trail Life, so we have a organization that, of course, we're very focused on a 2 deep leadership structure with that as well, where it's continually a chance to make sure that, hey, whether it's if you're not heading off to the restroom with your own parent or guardian, then it's 2 deep in all cases. So it's always checked. We're tasked with kind of checking the stalls and checking the bathroom before we even let the child into the restroom. And even still, then it's 2 sets of eyes that are still accessible at any given point. So it's a continual pattern. Is it the most convenient? No, but to your point, Susan, we're not allowing the opportunity for something to drive a truck through. Basically, we're creating as safe of a situation as we possibly can.
Cool. All right. So what are some other things that Susan, what are some other trends and other things that you guys see from a place of worship perspective that maybe we should be aware of or be asking about?
Yeah, actually, we were talking a little bit before the recording started about, abductions. And I do think, like we talked about 𝗂𝗏𝗏. I think, having a protocol in place, just general common sense about having kids within sight and sound and that kind of thing. But one thing we know at the National Center is that of the cases of missing kids who are reported to us, we do get some reports of what we call non-family abduction. So that's when a stranger abducts a child. We do see that. We had reports of that this past year in 2022, but we had about 100 reports of that. We had over 1,000 reports of what we call family abduction. So that's a case where someone known to the child, someone in their family, but who is not custodial. So someone who's not supposed to be caring for the child and it could be for a variety of reasons, but they abduct them. So usually that has to do with, parents had custody removed or something like that. So, one thing I can see how this intersects with churches is that is making sure that you know who's supposed to pick up a child and who's not, because that could be an opportunity for someone. Say you've got a grandparent who's now assumed responsibility for a child legally, has legal guardianship, and maybe the parent might know, hey, school's not going to let this fly because school has the records, school knows the story, but maybe church doesn't know yet that I don't have custody anymore. Or, or they could just come in town like I'm the father of the child, and the child will run to the parent if they know them, but maybe that parent's not supposed to have custody. So that can be really hard, I think, for churches to kind of manage, because there are a lot of variables and you can't, you don't necessarily know the whole background of everyone in your church, and you want to be welcoming to new members. So, thinking through kind of the simplest way. We were talking, I think before we started here, about, forms where you have people fill it out and maybe you give them a ticket to pick up that child, or it's just something as simple as, hey, the person or people who dropped this child off are the only people who can sign them out. But thinking that through so that, again, church isn't kind of an easy place where someone could come, to get a child they're not supposed to be caring for, would be another thing to keep an eye out for, I think, in churches.
And
For
enforcing that as well. I mean, just because you have the stickers in place and then somebody says, well, I lost my half of the ticket. Well, you need to have some teeth behind it and not just make exceptions, because then what's the point of the process? So if there's a added burden, okay, I'm sorry you lost your ticket. I'm sorry it's going to take us an extra few minutes for us to then verify that you are in fact supposed to be picking up these children, because we're going to make that extra effort to make sure that the kids are remaining safe. So I'm sorry you have to wait at the end of the line while we dismiss everybody else, and then we'll assign somebody to come over and work with you. But you find that people try to test the system even that way, where they're, hey, I'm gonna just pretend I lost my ticket. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. Yeah.
No, it's a great point. And to go back to, screening volunteers, another really important piece is supervision. So we're all going to train. And then, having people check, kind of stand, even maybe you're the tester with your own kid, or, standing and saying, hey, this child care provider who we're paying, or this volunteer, like, we need to talk about this checkout process and make sure that we're all, following the right thing. And you're right. And it could definitely make, annoy people. But framing it the way you did around, we're trying to keep your kid and all these kids safe. This is why we have these practices. I think with all of this, an important thing for churches to keep in mind too is, unfortunately, kids are across all types of victimization. They're most likely to be victimized by someone they know and trust. Right. And so, a lot of people who offend against children are very good at being very nice people. They, win over, we even talk about them grooming their victim, but also grooming the people around them. So, just because someone, is there every week seems so nice. The point of policies is they apply to literally everyone. So that's why I was using an example of, like, if I have a kid and I'm taking, I take them in a corner of the room where no one can see, it's really important, even if you completely trust me with your child, that we have the same policies. That helps because you will never spot someone who will offend against children. You cannot spot them. They go to great lengths again to be the most trustworthy person. But B, then when you have that person like you were talking earlier about who kind of does ring those red flags, it's so much less awkward to call them out if it's for everybody. If you have someone who's starting to concern you, if you enforce the rules for everyone, it makes it easier for us to call each other out and enforce those boundaries if it's not just for the person who makes me uncomfortable. This is just for everyone. And so it helps church be a safer place if those policies are consistent.
For sure. It's interesting because we've had, and I mentioned, I know I've mentioned to Mike before, but I mentioned before we went live that, we had that situation where a grandparent showed up, and it was basically a situation that we didn't realize, where the grandparent was trying to get custody of the child from the mom, a single mom. And so they weren't supposed to have any interaction, but again, there wasn't a restraining order in place. And it was one of those things where no one communicated to the church and said, here's what's going on. And so the grandparent showed up, they tried to get access. I mean, thankfully we had several different filters, and we were able to stop the grandparent. And then we ended up trespassing from the property that, we called the police, they came and trespassed the grandparent. But the thing that's interesting to me is, and I just want to throw out there for the churches to clarify, if you have a situation where there's a restraining order or there's something that should be a red flag, and that should be encouraging you to sit down and have a conversation with that individual that has the child, even if they're a new member, and say, can you explain? And it's not being nosy, it's trying to help them so they have, a worship-free, situation, or they can come in, drop the kids off, the kids can be safe, they can go enjoy, the sermon or whatever, the service, and not have to have any distractions from that. But truly, the reality is, you need to know about any situations like that. So if you haven't, maybe it's a new family and they came in and the mom made a comment or something like that, or the dad made a comment, it's certainly worth pulling them aside and saying, hey, I noticed you said this. Does that mean there's a situation where, you're separated? Could you just kind of explain that to me for the sake of the kids, so we can make sure that everyone's safe and protected? And so, oftentimes I've had family, as things come up over the years, different individuals will come to me and say, well, this person's not allowed because we're working on a restraining order. And that's fantastic information, because if that person were to try to do something, at least we're prepared at that point for the situations that we potentially know, versus hearing about it afterwards. Because we had a situation where husband and wife had been to the church for years, and then they separated, and the husband started getting abusive. The wife was like, I'm working on a restraining order. The children's workers wouldn't, we adjusted the system very quickly to remove him for having access to the kids. But the children's workers and the volunteers wouldn't necessarily have looked in the system, because they would have seen him and said, oh, he was here, a month ago. That's fine. We can let the kids go. So having those checks and balances, just to reemphasize and to know the situation and know what's going on and what's happening, and try to get that information ahead of time is invaluable to prevent stuff like that from happening. So, Mike, you wanted to.
Yeah, I wanted to take us in a slightly different direction, because I know we've talked a lot about the potential abduction or keeping the kids safe from a check-in standpoint and the right parent. Wanted to kind of go over a bit into kind of those that wander away, a church that may not keep a good enough eye on a door, and specifically a topic that we haven't spent a lot of time on this show is those that may have been diagnosed with autism or other sorts of challenges to their sensory processing, etc., that may create an environment where they're more likely to run away, to try to get away from the rock concert that might be going on in the sanctuary, or whatever it might be, to just being overwhelmed because somebody took their favorite toy. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and I know there's a lot of spaces in churches that can be kind of a spot where somebody that may be autistic, that may then choose to go hide under the stage, go hide in a moving crate that you may have a set up and tear down, to hidden closets that shouldn't have been left unlocked. So maybe if you could speak to that for a bit there, Susan.
Yeah, we actually have a number of resources available at the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, specific to what we call wandering and children on the autism spectrum. I think from a safety standpoint, the first thing to be mindful of is if you have any water on your property, if you are up against a lake, or even if you have a fountain or something in your church, because that's kind of our biggest fear when kids who have autism wander. Some of them are attracted to water, and it may be what you were talking about. For some kids, it may be a way to mute the senses, because when you go underwater, the noise that is overwhelming is muted out when you're water. That's for some kids. That's probably, that's not with anything we talk about with kids of autism. There's nothing that applies to every kid you're going to meet. But we go so far as to tell law enforcement that if you report a kid and we know they're on the autism spectrum, that's one of the first things that they will do. So if you have a body of water or something like that, that's the first place to go. I think if you have a parent or guardian who does share with you, information about their child, and especially if they have wandered other times, or things like that. And it is one of those things, if you can customize your plan to those kids, because some kids, for example, may really like lights and sirens. And so we have some first responders who will call the fire department and turn on the trucks because if they find a kid with autism is missing on a family camping trip or something. And then there's some kids exact opposite, that they get very overwhelmed with lights and sirens. And so we'll tell our first responders, even though you are emergency responding, to the extent you can cut off the sound will be your best bet in terms of getting, drawing that child out. So a lot of it is really, again, specific, but we have a ton of resources on our website, both for first responders, for families. We partner with the National Autism Association, who has some safety resources, and we put our tips for, kids who go missing on there as well. But it's important, for churches to be aware of, like you said, sometimes kids can get overwhelmed and not just wander, but sometimes bolt and run very quickly. So kind of, so it's a wide variety of behaviors, of course, but if you can be kind of in sync with the family a little bit about what they've seen in the past, what's been helpful or not helpful. And again, if you are taking the kids on, you're going to an outdoor worship space, or you're going to a retreat where there's a wilderness area, kind of being prepared with a, emergency response, and being ready to have that pertinent information should you need to contact law enforcement, things like that.
I know it's definitely a topic that needs more talking about. I feel like there's a lot of churches that don't understand the situation that creates. And I mean, how many of us as churches have baptismal fonts that are basically accessible? And that's a body of water. And
for sure.
Now pretty often it can be, as some churches, it may just be an inflatable hot tub that they use temporarily, but others, it's a permanent fixture of their lobby. And while that tends to be in a visible space, it's still water, and it does not take very much water for someone to get into trouble. So I think it's good to cover. I'm glad that there's resources out there, and I encourage churches to look into that. If you don't have a contact that is designated within your church, to look at how you can better serve those that may be have an autistic child, to look into that, because if you don't already have one, you will. And so it's better to be prepared up front and be aware on how you can serve that population.
For sure. I honestly had never heard that before about water. And we actually, on our church property, we have a because it's in a flood area, we have a retention pond that has a fountain in it. And, it's not very deep. You can actually stand in it, but it runs regularly. And I think it was last year or the year before, we actually added a life preserver and some, basically water rescue tools just in case. But that's fascinating. I did not know that. So it's that's definitely, and you're absolutely right, Mike. A lot of churches have either baptismals or just fountains for decoration on the property where
right.
That could certainly draw a kid's attention.
Well, and like I said, I mean, if they're missing somewhere else, I mean, we're worried about them. We want to find them. But if, as you said, the water can very quickly become a hazard. So that makes sense as a first place to look. Even if they don't have a history of doing that, might as well send someone there anyway and make sure if something like that happens.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time and hanging out with us tonight. And is there anything I did want to mention, and I'm just looking at the website. You have an education tab where there's a lot of opportunity for classes and stuff. Can you kind of go through and explain that if somebody was interested?
Sure. So we have an internet safety program called 𝗵𝗲, which is available on that education tag. You can download PowerPoint presentations, videos, discussion guides. So if you want to talk about online safety or you want to make those resources available to parents, there are tons of tip sheets you can just print out. We were talking earlier about, kids using YouTube and then bouncing off. We have a kid-safe website called 𝗵𝗲𝗃𝑠kids.org. You can make that available on your church computers. It doesn't bounce off anywhere else, and it just has games, activities, videos about internet safety that are available. We have 𝗃𝗄𝑚𝗲𝗃 as well, which is a personal safety program. Again, like tip sheets, PowerPoints, resource guides, quick talking points. You could even just print some of those talking points for parents if they want to go home and have a conversation with their kids about online safety. And then lastly, I would mention off that education tab is we have a resource called 𝗵𝗂𝗃 Connect, which is an online training platform. But I would say that there are many things on there that are applicable for parents. There's about online safety, and we didn't even talk about child sex trafficking, but I know that that's a topic a lot of people are worried about and thinking about. We have a great course just called Introduction to Child Sex Trafficking that kind of dispels the myths, gives a brief introduction. So if that's a topic that people are interested in, right off of that 𝗵𝗂𝗃 Connect, you can create a free account. We have a Parent Connect series, just a lot of free resources. As I said earlier, if you want to know about something, you can't find it on the website, you can't find these PowerPoint presentations I'm talking about, you can always call us, or you can email outreach@nicmec.org, and we will walk you through and help you find whatever you need.
That's awesome. I haven't set up an account yet. I will probably do that. But yeah, absolutely. Looking at some of the things offered, it seems like that would be great for like kids workers or like maybe kids leaders where they're trying to go through and maybe cover some of those topics like at training and that sort of thing. So that's great. I know one of the things that we typically do, we partner with one of the local sheriff's offices, and I think every other month they send a whole printout of different websites, to each of the faith-based organizations, just saying, hey, these are the trends that we're seeing, and kids going to this site, and this is good, this is bad, this is what's happening. So certainly, and that's helped us too, because we've passed it on to our church leadership to be able to say, okay, if you happen to be counseling a teen and they're using this app or this particular software, just to be careful, because this is what could happen from that. So it's kind of scary. I mean, we embrace technology from the standpoint of it makes our lives easier, or supposedly, but at the same time, you mentioned earlier Roblox and some of the other programs. My son, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, was playing that, and we've been very careful limiting, who he has access to, and he only had access to basically a world that he created with my other kids and my niece and nephew. So it was just a big family account. And we started getting weird emails, and noticed that he had somehow, managed to go out of that group into a larger group and got into this argument. And he wasn't intentionally doing anything. Like, it wasn't him, him intentionally being, mean or anything. He just got into this regular discussion. And so we had to sit down with him and say, look, you don't know who that person is. It's not like, your cousin or, your siblings. And so, we said that we're like, we don't know if this person was an adult playing the game, playing Roblox, or if it was another kid that, and they weren't using appropriate language with him, but it was like, okay, this is kind of weird. If it was another kid, I haven't heard too many kids talking like that.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something, and we appreciate you hanging out with us, like I mentioned, because it's definitely a topic that I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, just across the board with, preventative measures and trying to be aware of that sort of thing.
I think actually your story is a great example of exactly what we want parents to do. It is, you can keep track of the good websites and the bad websites, but the reality is they change. And the reality is also the best website, depending on who's on it, can also be a platform. I mean, we get reports from every single website. But exactly what you did, where what your kid's doing online, you're kind of keeping an eye, and when something went a little south, you were right there, and your child was sharing with you what they did online, and you're kind of in the world with them. That is 100% like the best thing you can do to keep kids safe online. But a lot of parents don't feel equipped, or they don't have time, or they're not involved in their kids' online life enough to know when something starts to go a little bit like that, and be able to be a resource to their kid to kind of get it back on a safe track and talk to them about why that might be an unsafe thing. So that story is actually a beautiful example of what we can all do for our kids to make sure that they're safe online. It's really the best thing.
Well, it's not, like you said, it's intimidating. It's intimidating for me. And I grew up in, the era of not having a computer till I was actually in college.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
So, but the crazy thing too is, we've had situations, this very similar with our teen group and with church too. So churches need to know about it. Leaders for sure need to know about it and really be equipped. And again, that's one of the great things that I love about your website, because there's so many different helpful resources on there, across the board, to help church leaders and to help, even if you're, even if you're listening and your church is really small and maybe you don't have a lot of dedicated folks, there's still stuff on there that is very beneficial that, can help you protect kids and teens. And so it's a great website. We'll definitely link to it again. And as I mentioned before, Mike, did you have anything just wrapping up?
No, it's good. I think you echo that sentiment. What we're doing here tonight is the fact that we're doing the first thing we should do is we're taking the topic seriously. We're exposing it on this show. We're talking about it. We're bringing to light additional resources, because nobody has all the answers, and none of us are the expert on this exclusively. We're always learning, and I think that's the value, is that we can seek more resources and continually learn, so that we create an environment where hopefully it never happens to a kid on our watch.
And that's truly what we want. We hope that, that again, that sort of thing never happens, but having those resources and knowing how to handle it, really, it's no different than being prepared for someone having a medical emergency or an active shooter situation or something like that. And in fact, statistically, you're far more likely, I know, to have a situation with a child where they turn up missing than an active shooter situation in your faith-based organization. So it's definitely a good topic to talk about. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate your time and hanging out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
All right, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. So I believe next week we have a special story. We're going to talk with an individual that was actually a victim of domestic abuse. So our topic for next week is going to be on domestic abuse in the church, and just bringing a little bit of awareness to that, and how we can address that accordingly as a church safety team and that sort of thing. But as always, if we can be of help to you or your church or your place of worship, please feel free to reach out to us. Our website is 𝗓𝗏𝑐𝑦𝑔uys.com, and we're happy to do whatever we can. There's numerous resources on the website, but if you're looking for something specific, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will do our best to facilitate that. So until next time, take care, have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.
This hour of broadcasting brought to you by 𝗃𝗴RadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast, brought to you by Vigilant Impact. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback and interaction. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams, join the discussion online, and connect with us on social media. For other great ministry resources, download the Church Security app or at our website at 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝑐𝑦𝑔uys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.